I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate.
Hello students, today we will be looking at Piaget's theory of moral development. So coming to the objectives of this module, first one is to understand the nature of Piaget's moral development. Next, to understand different stages of Piaget's moral development. And the last one is to understand the applications of this theory. So let's look at what is this theory all about. So morality is learned and acquired. Acquisition of moral sense or learning to behave in a socially approved way does not come overnight. So it grows from birth and slowly moves to childhood and into adolescence. Today we will be looking at an important theory, that is Piaget's theory of moral development. Earlier we have come across Piaget's theory of cognitive development, and now let's look at moral development. Piaget believed that observing children, playing games and querying them about the rules provided a realistic lab on fire for understanding how morality principles develop. In his book, The Moral Judgment of the Child, he studied children playing the game of marbles. I'm sure you all also must have done playing those marbles when you were young. Piaget often used a practiced technique of feigned naivety. He pretended to be ignorant of the rules of the games and asked the children to explain them to him. In this way, he was able to comprehend the way that the children themselves understood the rules and to observe as how children of different ages related to the rules and the game. On the first thought, it might seem odd that Piaget believed he could learn all important aspects of moral development by observing children's play. But as Ginsberg and Opper noted that on a closer inspection, it would seem as if the rules governing the game of marbles fulfill all the defining conditions of a moral system. The rules control how individuals behave towards one another in terms of the actions which comprise the game, and they determine individual and property rights, and they are a cultural product which has been passed down from generation to generation. The rules have been developed largely by children. So therefore, a child's conception of the game is subject to little adult influence. Through the observation, he concluded that children younger than 5 years had no rules at all. Children falling in the age group between 5 to 10 years were found to observe rules, but they saw them fixed and unchangeable. By the age 10 years, children were able to think of their own rules and recognize that these could be adopted by mutual consent. And a second technique used by Piaget in studying moral development was to relate a short story or a scenario that described some form of misbehavior by a child or by an adult. He then presented the children with possible corrective actions that might be meted out to the offender and asked the children to tell him which were fair and just and which were not and why. If a child neglects a chore, for example, after repeated requests, which is an appropriate punishment or correction, here Piaget distinguished between expiation, that is atonement, and reciprocity as punishment strategies. Expiation meant that some form of punitive action like spanking or confinement. It would be invoked in which the offender must pay the price for the offense. In contrast, reciprocity implies setting things right. With reciprocity, a child must be made to see the consequences of his or her neglect and to clearly understand the need to behave in a cooperative manner. Piaget observed 4 stages in the child's development of moral understanding of rules, based largely on his observation of children's games. The first stage characterizes the sensorimotor period of development. That's where children under 4 years, in which the child merely handles the marbles in terms of his existing motor schemes. In the second stage, about 4 to 7, game playing is egocentric. Children don't understand rules very well, or they make up as they go along. There is neither a strong sense of cooperation nor of competition. The third stage, at about ages 7 to 10 or 11, is characterized by incipient cooperation. That is, interactions are more social and rules are mastered and observed. Social interactions become more formalized as regards rules of the game. A child learns and understands both cooperative and competitive behavior. In the fourth stage, beginning about at age 11 or 12, cooperation is more earnest and a child comes to understand rules in a more legalistic fashion. And Piaget calls this a stage of genuine cooperation in which the older child shows a kind of legalistic fascination with the rules. He enjoys setting differences of opinion concerning the rules, inventing new rules, and elaborating on them. He even tries to anticipate all the possible contingencies that may arise. And stages in relation to cognitive development. Again, these in relation to cognitive and moral development. At stage 1, if we look at, that is pre-moral stage, that's from 0 to 5 years. Little understanding of rules, as children can't carry out complex mental operations, is seen. Behavior is regulated from outside the child, where you see this in sensorimotor and pre-operational stage when it comes to cognitive development. And coming to stage 2, that is heteronomous or moral realism. This happens between 5 to 9 years, where rules are rigid and given by adults or God. Rules tell you what is right or wrong. Consequences dictate the severity of a behavior and not the pre-intentions. And this can be seen in pre-operational and concrete operational in stages of cognitive development, which you have learnt earlier. Coming to stage 3 in moral development, that is autonomous morality or moral relativism. That's 10 years and upwards. Emphasis is more on cooperation, where children learn that rules are changeable under circumstances and with mutual consent. And this can be seen in concrete and formal operational in cognitive development. And to have a better understanding of these, we look at 2 stories. Coming to story number 1. A little boy called John is in his room. He is called to dinner. He goes into the dining room, but behind the door there was a chair, and on the chair there was a tray with 15 cups on it. John couldn't have known that they were all this behind the door. He goes in, the door knocks again the tray and bangs to the 15 cups, and they all get broken. Now let's look at story number 2. One day when Henry's mother was out, he tried to get some jam out of the cupboard. He climbed up on a chair and stretched out his arm, but the jam was too high up and he couldn't reach it and have any. But while he was trying to get it, he knocked over a cup, and the cup fell down and broke. Who would say a 7-year-old is naughtier? Out in these 2 stories, if you look at, who is naughty and why? If I ask you, what would be your response? And according to Piaget, younger children focus on the consequences of behavior. That is, the boy who accidentally broke 15 cups was naughtier than the boy who broke 1 cup while doing something he shouldn't. They base their judgments on the amount of damage, and this he called it as moral realism. Children aged 10 and above saw the motivation or intent behind the act as important in determining naughtier. So the child who broke a cup while trying to steal was naughtier as his motives were bad, and this he called it as moral relativism. And Piaget, in the year 1932, he was principally more interested not in what children can do, that's whether they break rules or not, but in what they actually think. In other words, he was more interested in children's moral reasoning. Piaget was interested in 3 main aspects of children's understanding of moral issues, and they were: first one, that's children's understanding of rules. This leads to questions like, where do rules come from? Can rules be changed? Who makes rules? Second, children's understanding of moral responsibility. This leads to questions like, who is to blame for bad things? Is it the outcome of behavior that makes an action bad? Is there a difference between accidental and deliberate wrongdoing? Coming to the third one, children's understanding of justice. And this leads to questions like, should the punishment fit the crime? Are the guilty always punished? And Piaget found that children's ideas regarding rules, moral judgments and punishment tend to change as they got older. In other words, just as there were stages to children's cognitive development, so also there were universal stages to their moral development. And based on these, he has come up with stages of moral development. Now let's look at different stages or types in moral development or thinking according to Piaget. And according to Piaget, there are 2 types of moral thinking. First one is heteronomous morality, which he called it also as moral realism, and the second one is autonomous morality, which he also called it as moral relativism. So let's look at stage 1, that's heteronomous morality. This occurs between 5 to 9 years of age. So the stage of heteronomous morality is also known as moral realism. That's morality which is imposed from the outside. So children regard morality as obeying other people's rules and laws which cannot be changed. They accept that all rules are made by some authority figure, and that breaking the rules will lead to immediate and severe punishment, that is imminent justice. The function of any punishment is to make the guilty suffer, in that the severity of the punishment should be related to severity of wrongdoing, that is expiatory punishment. During this stage, children consider rules as being absolute and unchanging. It's more like divine alike. They think that rules cannot be changed and have always been the same as they are now, and behavior is judged as bad in terms of observable consequences, regardless on the intentions or reasons for that behavior. Therefore, a large amount of accidental damage is viewed as worse than a small amount of deliberate damage. And Piaget told children stories that embodied a moral theme and then asked for their opinion. Here are 2 examples. There was once a little girl who was called Mary. She wanted to give her mother a nice surprise and cut out a piece of sewing for her. But she didn't know how to use the scissors properly and cut a big hole in her dress. And a little girl called Margaret went and took her mother's scissors one day when her mother was out. She played with them for a bit, Then, as she didn't know how to use them properly, she made a little hole in her dress. And the child is then asked, who is naughtier? Typically, younger children, that's in pre-operational and early concrete operational, that's age up to 9 to 10 years, say that Mary is the naughtier child, although they recognize the distinction between a well-intentioned act that turned out badly and a careless, thoughtless or malicious act. They tend to judge naughtiness in terms of the severity of the consequence rather than in terms of motives. And this is what Piaget meant by moral realism. What children understand by a lie? Seriousness of a lie is measured by younger children in terms of the size of the departure from the truth. So, a child who said he saw a dog the size of an elephant would be judged to have told a worse lie than a child who said he saw a dog the size of a horse, even though the first child is less likely to be believed. The function of punishment is to make the guilty suffer, and Piaget called this retributive justice or expiatory punishment, because punishment is seen as an act of retribution or revenge. Young children have a very Old Testament view of punishment, that's an eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Punishment is seen as a deterrent to further wrongdoing, and the stricter it is, the more effective they imagine it will be. And Piaget described the morality as heteronomous morality. Morality which is basically formed out of being subject to another's rules. For young children, these are the rules that adults impose upon them, and it is thus a morality that comes from unilateral respect. That is to say, the respect children owe to their parents. As children get older, the circumstances of their lives change and their whole attitude to moral questions undergoes a radical change. Now let's look at stage 2, autonomous morality. It is also known as moral relativism, that is morality which is based on your own rules. Children recognize there is no absolute right or wrong, and that morality depends on intentions and not consequences. Piaget believed that around the age of 9 to 10 years, children's understanding of moral issue undergoes a fundamental reorganization. By now, they begin to overcome the egocentrism of middle childhood and develop the ability to see moral rules from the other people's point of view. As a result, children's ideas on the nature of rules themselves, on moral responsibility and on punishment and justice all change, and their thinking becomes more like that of adults. Children now understand that rules do not come from some mystical divine-like source. People make rules and people can change them. They are not inscribed on tablets of stone. With regard to the rules of the game, older children recognize that rules are needed to prevent quarreling and to ensure fair play. Sometimes they even become quite fascinated with the whole issue, and they will, for example, discuss the rules of board games or sport, which is the offside of the rule, with all the interests of a lawyer. They also recognize that rules can be changed if circumstances dictate. Example, you have got one player less, so we'll give you a 3-goal start, and if everybody agrees with regard to issues of blame and moral responsibility, older children don't just take the consequences into account, they also consider motives. Children begin to realize that if they behave in ways that appear to be wrong but have good intentions, they are not necessarily going to be punished. Thus, for them, a well-intentioned act that turned out badly is less blameworthy than a malicious act that did no harm. So, in the previous research study, children of 10 and over typically considered Margaret as a naughtier child. Although Mary made a much bigger hole in her dress, she was motivated by the desire to please her mother, whereas Margaret may have caused less damage but did not act out of noble intentions. It all goes to show, in Piaget's opinion, that children are now capable to appreciate the significance of subjective facts and of internal responsibility. Children's views on lying also change. The seriousness of a lie is judged in terms of betrayal of trust. They now recognize that all lies are not the same, and for example, you might tell a white lie in order to spare someone's feelings. Overall, lying is now considered wrong, not because you get punished for it by adults, the younger children's view, but because it is a betrayal of trust and undermines friendship and cooperation. With regard to punishment, the emphasis now moves from retribution to restitution. Its purpose is to primarily to make the guilty suffer, but to put things right again. In other words, punishment should be aimed at helping the offender understand the harm he or she has caused, so that he or she will not be motivated to repeat the offense, and whenever possible, punishment should fit the crime. Say for example, when a vandal is required to make good the damage he or she has caused. Older children also recognize that justice in real life is an imperfect system. Sometimes the guilty get away with their crimes, and sometimes the innocent suffer unfairly. For younger children, collective punishment is seen as acceptable. For example, they would not disagree with a whole class being punished for the misdeeds of a single child. For the older children, it is always considered wrong to punish the innocent for the misdeeds of the guilty. Overall, Piaget describes the morality of the older child as an autonomous morality, that is, a morality which is subject to its own laws. The change is partly seen as a result of child's general cognitive development, partly due to declining egocentrism, and partly to the growing importance of the peer group. The reference group for children's moral beliefs is increasingly focused on other children, and disputes between equals need to be negotiated and compromises are made. In place of the unilateral respect, the younger children owe to their parents an attitude of mutual respect which governs relations between peers. And let's look at a simple dialogue as to how Piaget used a researcher along with a child to come to an understanding of his moral development. And this is taken from Piaget's textbook in the year 1932 from pages 124 to 125. So let's look at what this dialogue was all about. So the researcher tried to ask a child this question: is one of the boys who broke the teacups naughtier than the other? And the child responded, the first is because he knocked over 12 cups. Next question which the researcher asked was, if you were the daddy, which one would you punish most? And the child responded, the one who broke 12 cups. And then again the researcher asked, why did he break them? And the child responded, the door shut too hard and knocked them. He didn't do it on purpose. Then again the researcher asked the child, and why did the other boy break a cup? Then the answer came, he wanted to get the jam. He moved too far, the cup got broken. Again the researcher asked another question, why did he want to get the jam? The child responded, because he was all alone, because his mother wasn't there. Then again a researcher asked another question, have you got a brother? A child responded, no, a little sister. The researcher asked this question again, well, if it was you who had broken the 12 cups when you went into the room, and your little sister who had broken one cup when she was trying to get the jam, which of you would be punished more severely? Again a child responded saying, me, because I broke more than one cup. So here if you look at this dialogue between the researcher and the child understood that the boy who broke 12 cups did not do this intentionally. Yet he still claimed that this boy was more guilty, he deserved greater punishment than the one who broke just a single cup while doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. So older children and adults find this idea of justice a little perplexing. So coming to the application of Piaget's theory. This theory of moral development can be seen as an application of its ideas on cognitive development generally. As such, his theory here has both the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. So coming to it, first, reliability. Piaget used qualitative methods, that's observation and clinical interviews. His research is based on very small samples and his methods are not standardized and therefore not replicable. It is impossible to say from his research how generalizable the results are. His is exploratory research, which is useful for generating new ideas rather than for rigorous testing of hypotheses. Second, in terms of validity, again, is Piaget's testing what he thinks he is testing? This again is not clear. For example, in his story of the broken cups, Piaget claims to find a difference in children's views of what is fair or right. However, it may be that the answer the children give is based on their view of what would actually happen in such circumstances, not what they think should happen. Third, in terms of underestimating children's rate of development, shift from moral realism to moral relativism occurs around the age of 9 to 10, and that children younger than this do not take motives into account. Other research suggests that children develop an understanding of the significance of subjective facts at a much earlier age. And Nelson, in the year 1980, found that even 3-year-olds could distinguish intentions from consequences if the story was made simple enough. And the next, what do children's reply to a story actually mean? This again is not necessarily clear. Do they understand the story? Are they able to remember it correctly? Do they give the answer that they think will please the experimenter? Is their reply governed by the substantive aspects of the story, what actually happens, or by the moral principle embedded in it? Again, all these questions are not clearly answered in his theory. And the last one, in the application, Piaget's research is about children's moral reasoning. And many psychologists argue that what is far more important is not what children think about moral issues, but how they actually behave. And this is all about Piaget's theory. So summary of the lesson, morals play an important role in one's lives. We learn them from birth, infancy, childhood, into adolescence, which shapes our adult lives. Today we have seen Piaget's theory of moral development. It comes from game theory, that's a marble game. There are two stages in moral development, that is heteronomous morality and autonomous morality, where one is more concerned with morality of constraints and the other morality of cooperation. Children believe that rules are fixed in one and realize that rules are made by people and can be changed by people in the later. So these are the two stages given by Piaget, and you could reflect more by looking at the examples.